Most people don't know that one of the deadliest resistance fighters in occupied Holland was a teenage girl who looked so innocent that Nazi officers never suspected her until it was too late. But the real story isn't what the propaganda tells you. The truth is way more complicated, way darker, and way more tragic than anyone wants to admit. When you hear about resistance fighters in World War II, you probably think of armed partisans in the forests or secret agents parachuting behind enemy lines. Those are the famous stories. Those are the ones they make movies about. But there's another story that almost nobody knows. A story about a girl who used her appearance as a weapon. A story about seduction and murder in Nazi-occupied Holland. A story about a family that never knew what their daughter was really doing until it was too late. So, who was she? Why did she do it? And how did a 15-year-old girl become one of the most effective assassins? In the Dutch resistance, let's talk about the truth that both her family and the resistance tried to hide. Her name was Hannie Schaft. She was born in Haarlem, Netherlands in 1920. That makes her about 23 when the Germans invaded Holland in 1940, not 15. But here's what's important. Hannie looked young. She looked innocent. She had red hair and a soft face. She looked like someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who couldn't possibly be dangerous. And that's exactly what made her so deadly. When the Nazis invaded Holland in May 1940, the country fell in just 5 days. 5 days. The Dutch military was overwhelmed. The government fled to London. The country was occupied. And for the next 5 years, Holland was under Nazi control. The Nazis came in and they did what they always did. They started rounding people up. First, it was political enemies. Communists, socialists, anyone who had opposed fascism before the war. Then it was Jewish people. Holland had a large Jewish population. Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague. Jewish families had lived there for generations. They were Dutch citizens. They were part of Dutch society. But the Nazis didn't care. By 1942, the deportations had started. Jewish families were being forced from their homes. They were being sent to transit camps. From transit camps, they were being sent east, to Poland, to the death camps, to Auschwitz and Sobibor and Treblinka. The Dutch people watched it happen. Some helped. Some hid Jewish families in their homes, in their attics, in secret rooms. Some looked the other way. Some collaborated with the Nazis, and some, like Hannie, decided to fight back. Hannie was a law student before the war. She was studying at the University of Amsterdam. She was smart, idealistic, principled. She believed in justice. She believed in human rights. When the Nazis started persecuting Jewish students, when they started banning Jewish people from universities, Hannie couldn't accept it. She had Jewish friends. She had classmates who were suddenly being told they couldn't attend lectures, couldn't take exams, couldn't continue their education. And then those same friends started disappearing, being arrested, being deported. Hannie made a decision. She wasn't going to stand by and watch. She wasn't going to be a passive witness to what was happening. She was going to do something, anything, even if it meant risking everything. At first, Hannie's resistance work was simple. She helped distribute underground newspapers. These were illegal publications that told the truth about what the Nazis were doing. They told people about the deportations. They told people about the resistance. They encouraged people to fight back, to hide Jewish families, to sabotage German operations. Distributing these newspapers was dangerous. If you were caught with them, you could be arrested. You could be sent to a concentration camp. But Hannie did it anyway. Then Hannie started doing something more dangerous. She started helping Jewish families hide. She would find safe houses for them. She would forge identity papers. She would help move Jewish children from one hiding place to another. This was incredibly risky work. If the Nazis caught you helping Jewish people, you weren't just arrested. You were executed. No trial, no warning, just execution. But Hannie wasn't satisfied with just helping people hide. She wanted to do more. She wanted to hurt the Nazis. She wanted to make them pay for what they were doing. So she joined a resistance cell, a small group of fighters who were actively attacking the German occupation. And that's when Hannie became an assassin. The resistance cell that Hannie joined specialized in targeted killings. They didn't attack German military installations. They didn't blow up trains or bridges. They killed individuals, specific individuals, Nazi officers, collaborators, traitors, people who were helping the Germans hunt down resistance fighters and Jewish families. These weren't random killings. These were executions, carefully planned, carefully executed assassinations designed to eliminate the most dangerous enemies of the resistance. Hannie's role was unique. Most resistance fighters were men. Most of them looked like fighters. They looked suspicious. But Hannie didn't look suspicious. She looked harmless. She looked like an ordinary Dutch girl. Young, pretty, innocent. Nazi officers would see her, and they wouldn't think danger. They would think opportunity. And that's exactly what Hannie used against them. She would approach Nazi officers in bars, in cafes, in public places. She would smile at them. She would talk to them. She would flirt with them. She would make them think she was interested. She would make them think she wanted to spend time with them. And when they were alone, when they were isolated, when they thought they were about to have a romantic encounter, Hannie would pull out a pistol and she would kill them. The weapon she used was small, small enough to hide in a purse or under her coat. It was a pistol, probably a small caliber handgun that wouldn't make too much noise. She would wait until the officer was distracted, until he was vulnerable, and then she would shoot him. One shot, maybe two, quick, efficient, deadly. The first time Hannie killed someone, it was reportedly a high-ranking SS officer. The resistance had identified him as someone who was involved in organizing deportations of Jewish families. He was a target. He had to be eliminated. Hannie volunteered to do it. She approached him in a bar. She talked to him. She convinced him to walk with her to a quieter location. And when they were alone, she shot him. He died instantly. After that first kill, Hannie became one of the Resistance's most valuable operatives. She could get close to targets that male resistance fighters couldn't approach. She could move through occupied territory without raising suspicion. She looked too innocent to be dangerous, and that made her incredibly effective. Over the next 2 years, from 1943 to 1945, Hannie killed multiple Nazi officers. The exact number is disputed by historians. Some accounts say she killed 12 confirmed targets. Some say fewer. Some say more. What's certain is that she was responsible for multiple assassinations, multiple successful operations, multiple dead Nazis who had been hunting Jewish families and resistance fighters. But Hannie didn't just kill Nazi officers. She also killed Dutch collaborators. These were Dutch people who were working with the Germans, informants who were betraying resistance fighters, police officers who were helping round up Jewish families, bureaucrats who were processing deportation orders. These collaborators were just as dangerous as the Nazi officers. Maybe more dangerous because they knew the local population. They knew who to suspect. They knew who to watch. One of Hannie's most famous operations was the assassination of a Dutch police chief who had been collaborating with the Gestapo. This man had been responsible for the arrest of dozens of resistance fighters. He had been helping the Germans hunt down Jewish families. He was a traitor, and Hannie killed him. She approached him on the street. She shot him in broad daylight, and she disappeared into the crowd before anyone could react. But Hannie's activities were becoming increasingly dangerous. The Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, knew that someone was killing their officers. They knew that there was a resistance assassin operating in Harlem. They didn't know who it was, but they were looking. They were investigating. They were interrogating people. They were torturing suspects. They were getting closer. By early 1945, the war was almost over. The Allies had landed in Normandy. They were pushing through France. They were liberating Europe. Germany was losing. Everyone knew it. The Nazis knew it. The resistance knew it. Liberation was coming. It was just a matter of time. But Hannie didn't stop. She kept fighting. She kept killing. She kept taking risks. In March 1945, just 3 weeks before Holland was liberated, Hannie was caught. She was stopped at a German checkpoint. The soldiers wanted to see her papers. She had false identity documents. She had used them dozens of times before. They had always worked. But this time, something went wrong. Maybe the soldiers were more careful. Maybe they had better training. Maybe they were just suspicious. Whatever the reason, they didn't believe her papers were real. The soldiers arrested her. They took her to Gestapo headquarters. They interrogated her. They wanted to know who she was. They wanted to know if she was involved in resistance activities. Hannie denied everything. She said she was just an ordinary Dutch girl. She said her papers were real. She said they had made a mistake. But the Gestapo didn't believe her. They searched her. They found the pistol. The small pistol that she had used to kill Nazi officers. The weapon that had made her one of the most effective assassins in the Dutch resistance. She was caught. There was no talking her way out of this. She was a resistance fighter. She was an assassin. And the Nazis were going to execute her. The Gestapo tortured her. They wanted names. They wanted to know who else was in her resistance cell. They wanted to know where the other fighters were hiding. They wanted to know everything. But Hannie didn't talk. She didn't give them anything. She endured the torture. She stayed silent. She protected her comrades. On April 17, 1945, just 3 weeks before Holland was liberated, the Nazis executed Hannie Schaft. They took her to the dunes outside Harlem. They made her kneel, and they shot her. She was 24 years old. The war was almost over. Liberation was coming, but Hannie didn't live to see it. Here's what makes Hannie's story even more tragic. Her family didn't know what she had been doing. They knew she was involved in resistance activities. They knew she helped distribute newspapers. But they didn't know she was an assassin. They didn't know she had killed Nazi officers. They didn't know how dangerous her work really was. When Hannie was arrested, her family thought it was a mistake. They thought she would be released. They thought she would come home. When news of her execution reached them, they were devastated. But they still didn't know the full truth. It wasn't until 1947, 2 years after the war ended, that Hannie's family learned what she had really been doing. The resistance published records of their operations. They published lists of fighters who had died. They published accounts of what those fighters had accomplished. And that's when Hannie's family learned that their daughter had been one of the most effective assassins in the Dutch resistance, that she had killed multiple Nazi officers, that she had used seduction as a weapon, that she had risked everything over and over again until she was finally caught. The family was shocked. They were proud, but they were also heartbroken. They had lost their daughter, and they had never truly known who she was, what she was capable of, what she had sacrificed. After the war, Hannie became a symbol of Dutch resistance. She became a national hero. Monuments were built in her honor. Streets were named after her. Books were written about her. She became known as the girl with the red hair, the young woman who had fought the Nazis and paid the ultimate price. But here's what makes Hannie's story complicated. Here's what makes it different from other resistance stories. Hannie wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained in combat. She wasn't part of an official military organization. She was a civilian, a young woman who decided that murder was justified, that killing was necessary, that the ends justified the means. And she used seduction. She used her appearance. She used the fact that men found her attractive. She weaponized femininity. She turned flirtation into a tool for assassination. Is that empowering? Is that tragic? Is it both? It's a complicated question. A question that doesn't have an easy answer. What's clear is that Hannie believed she was doing the right thing. She believed that killing Nazi officers would save lives, that eliminating collaborators would protect Jewish families and resistance fighters, that every Nazi officer she killed was one less person hunting innocent people. She believed it so strongly that she was willing to risk everything, willing to die for it, and eventually she did die for it. The real tragedy of Hannie Schaft isn't just that she died 3 weeks before liberation. It's that she had to become an assassin in the first place. It's that a law student, a young woman who believed in justice and human rights, was forced to become a killer. It's that the Nazi occupation created conditions where murder became resistance, where seduction became a weapon, where a 24-year-old woman with red hair became one of the most dangerous people in occupied Holland. After the war, the Dutch people struggled with how to remember the resistance. Some resistance fighters were celebrated as heroes. Others were forgotten. Some operations were glorified. Others were quietly buried. Hannie's story was complicated because it involved a young woman using seduction to kill men. It raised uncomfortable questions about gender, about violence, about what's acceptable in war. But eventually, the Dutch people decided that Hannie deserved to be remembered, not as a femme fatale, not as a seductress, but as a resistance fighter, as someone who fought against evil, as someone who sacrificed everything for what she believed in, as someone who died trying to protect innocent people from genocide. Today, if you go to Harlem, you can find monuments to Hannie Schaft. You can see her name on memorials. You can visit the place where she was executed. You can remember the girl with the red hair who killed Nazi officers and died 3 weeks before liberation. Hannie's story raises questions that we still struggle with today. Questions about resistance. Questions about violence. Questions about what's justified in war. Questions about whether civilians should become fighters. Questions about whether the ends really do justify the means. Hannie believed they did. She believed that killing Nazi officers was justified, that it would save lives, that it was necessary. And maybe she was right. Maybe every Nazi officer she killed was one less person sending Jewish families to death camps. Maybe every collaborator she eliminated was one less person betraying resistance fighters. Maybe her actions did save lives. But the cost was enormous. The cost was her life. The cost was her innocence. The cost was her family's peace of mind. The cost was the trauma of becoming a killer at 24 years old. Even if what she did was justified, even if it was necessary, it still came at a terrible price. The real story of Hannie Schaft isn't a story of a teenage seductress killing Nazis for fun. It's not a story of female empowerment through violence. It's not a simple story of good versus evil. It's a much more complicated story. It's a story about a young woman who found herself in an impossible situation. A story about someone who decided that resistance was more important than survival. A story about someone who used whatever weapons she had available, including her appearance, including seduction, including a small pistol hidden in her purse. It's a story about the cost of resistance, the cost of fighting evil, the cost of standing up when everyone else is looking away. And it's a story that deserves to be remembered, not for the propaganda value, not for the shock value, but for the truth. The complicated, tragic, uncomfortable truth about what war does to people, about what occupation does to civilians, about what genocide does to those who try to stop it. Hannie Schaft was one of those people. She tried to stop it. She fought back. She killed Nazi officers and collaborators. She protected Jewish families and resistance fighters. She risked everything. And 3 weeks before liberation, she was executed in the dunes outside Harlem. She was 24 years old, and her family didn't learn the truth about what she'd done until 2 years after the war ended. That's the real story. Not a story about a teenage girl seducing and killing 12 Nazi officers, but a story about a young woman who became an assassin because she believed it was the only way to fight back. A story about sacrifice. A story about resistance. A story about the terrible cost of doing what you believe is right when the world has gone insane. If you want to see more videos about the real stories from World War II that go beyond the propaganda, hit subscribe. New videos every week.